Hello everybody, this is Peter Svidler for Chess24, recording a highlights video for round 5 of Tata Steel Chess Vikensay tournament in 2017. And for today's game of the day, we opted for a perhaps somewhat controversial choice. This was a round which featured a great number of decisive games, but we felt that the most interesting game and the most action-packed game was actually a game that ended in a draw. And I'll be taking a look at the game where Yi played with white pieces against Yi-Giri. So let's go there. As you can see, Wei Yi was actually in plus against Anish in their personal encounters until today. He won one game and two were drawn. And as usual, the Chinese youngster started with one e4. And Anish's choice is already quite interesting. These days, Anish is very much one of the premier Neidorf players of playing in the elite tournaments. He and MVL are basically carrying the torch of the Neidorf. And the fact that Anish chose to play c6, not a move that he never makes, but a move that he doesn't really make anywhere near as often as c5 and d5, was already quite interesting. C6 and the Caro-Kann are probably currently, this is probably the way to get the most fighting positions, and the positions you get in the Caro-Kann are perhaps least likely to lead to forced draws. Although it wasn't exactly true about the variation that happened today. d4, d5, knight g2, where he generally plays knight g2 here or knight c3, it generally leads to same positions. Instead of 3e5, which is a choice of many other top players. And I think that Anish was quite confident in preparing for a specific position. I'm sorry, my English seems to be deserting me today. h4, h6, knight f3, and in the old days it was absolutely obligatory. It was felt that black needed to play knight d7 here. But e6, when it was realized that knight d7 is not really forced, e6 very fast became a very serious contender for the main move in this position, because in many cases the knight on b8 can actually be developed more actively, because black in many sublines of this variation, black will be trying to play c6, c5 as early as possible, and then the knight might actually come out to c6. Knight e5, bishop h7, bishop d3, takes, knight d7. Here c5, it's difficult to realize it. It more applies to lines where white plays h5, bishop h7 and bishop d3 in this position instead of knight e5. Here knight d7 is by far the main move. And after f4, the move Anish chose here is, I think, fast becoming a very, very serious option here. Black can also take, I also, I think, made this mistake during the live show. I think the correct move order for this is c5, bishop e3, knight e5, fe, c takes d4, and this is a reasonably well-known position with a lot of practice as well. There's also, of course, an option to go knight gf6 and just develop normally, but then the fact that white gets an early f4 means that he will have a bit of a head start with his potential attack on the king's side. Bishop e7 is what Anish chose here, and this is a very, very forcing move, which seems to lead, according to current practice, it leads to very playable, perhaps just simply equal positions after a somewhat forced sequence. Bishop d2, knight takes e5, fe5, bishop takes h4, castles long, bishop g3. Of course, you cannot even consider for a second going for something like this. It just looks completely horrible. Black's, I think this color is a better indication of what I think about those pieces. Black just will never complete development here. And knight h5 arguably maybe is even stronger. Bishop takes g3, queen takes g3, and knight e7. And this is still reasonably well known, and there are games starting from this position played by very strong players. For instance, in the Baku Olympiad in 2016, there was a game between Ivan Šarić and Šahmamedjarov in which black was perfectly comfortable, seemingly, or at least black survived in the end, let's put it like this, from this position. The tactical justification for this is obviously queen e7, rook d2, and black is perfectly fine. Bishop b4, the move that Wei chose after some very serious thought, is, I think, not going to be particularly popular, but I think you can generally just count on Wei to opt for positions which are more alive. I think he understood that after queen takes g7, Anish will blitz out the next, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 moves, depending on how critical your play will be. And then the game most likely will end in a draw. And he attempted to get a somewhat non-standard position where perhaps Anish is not as well prepared. But Black has no weaknesses. Yes, he has currently the king stuck in the center on e8, but opening up any files in the center to exploit that will not at all be easy. And White is a full pawn down here. So bishop b4 is already putting White's game somewhat at risk. Knight f5, queen f4. White at least tries to stop Black from playing queen g5 comfortably, because if you allow Black to play queen g5 check and then castle long, there's really very little in the way of compensation that you can claim. And here Anish correctly played g5. Even this has still been seen in strong players' games. There was a game in Warsaw in 2016 where Hrant Melkumian was on the black side of this, and White played queen f3. Somewhat surprisingly, Hrant decided not to play queen d5 here. After queen d5 here, Black is doing very, very well. Hrant instead went g4, queen takes g4, and here not knight e3, of course, because of queen g7, but queen d5. And he eventually won this game, but I'm not sure if it's such a great idea to immediately give up your extra pawn instead of making something very sensible, like playing something sensible like queen d5. Wei played queen f2, and now Black, of course, decides to stop the very important g2, g4 move by playing g4 themselves. And we get the position where you can start discussing the strengths and weaknesses of the two sides. White has a very strong bishop on b4, at least it looks very strong, and a much more safe and secure king position, and options perhaps for c4, d5 breaks in the center to try and play against the Black king on e8. On the other hand, Black has a fantastic knight on f5, a very, very safe and healthy pawn structure, and most importantly, I guess, Black has the extra pawn, which means that he can very, very confidently go for simplifications, because he will be better in every single endgame. Wei very understandably played c4, and in this position Anish made a move which is very natural, but which probably isn't the best, because there was an option here to play a5, which I'm sure he considered this, but he felt that he's not really gaining very much in case of bishop a3. If you play b5 here, White can take, and the bishop goes to c5, although even this position I quite like for Black, something like queen d5, king b1, b4, or maybe king d7, looks quite attractive. I'm not sure b4 is that required. You can also, at most points in positions like this, it makes sense to improve your position a little bit by playing h6, h5, making sure that, for instance, rook h5 takes f5 never becomes even an idea, let alone a threat. But apart from b5, there's also a very, very concrete way of playing here. You can play queen g5 check, and after king b1, or rook d2, frankly, you can play queen e3. And this probably forces the queens off. And frankly, I would expect Anish to convert from here. I think that had he played a5, I think Wei's situation would be very, very critical. If you have to play something like bishop d2 here to stop queen g5, queen e3, even queen takes d4, a very simple move, leads to endgames where Black is a huge favorite to win. And Black can also wait for a move and start, let's say, with b7, b5. And I think had Anish settled on a5 in this position, he would probably go on to win. Instead, he played queen b6, also a move which is very natural and develops the queen, forces White to spend some time protecting his structure. And Black is really only one move away from consolidation. He can play long castle straight away, and perhaps even stronger than castling here would be to start with h6, h5. Once again, stopping any ideas of rook h5, f5, protecting the pawn on g4 for future use, and then you either castle next move, or perhaps in some positions you may consider playing b7, b5. But mainly you just want to castle and play b6, queen b7, just normalize your position, and then your pawn majority on the king side will start to tell. Instead, Anish played g3, a move which I can perfectly understand perfectly well. He is trying to drive the queen away from f2, where, for instance, if you castle immediately, the queen supports the d5 break, because now you cannot take twice because you will lose the knight on f5, and there's also the pressure against the a7 pawn. So the temptation to drive the queen away from f2, I perfectly understand. But on the other hand, and also the queen maybe has even better squares than f2. Arguably something like queen e2, long castles, and here rook hf1 is maybe not that bad for white. Rook hf1 is maybe not the most accurate move, because once again black will probably immediately play h5 with the idea of putting it on h4. Therefore, king b2, very similar to the game, but I think with the queen on e2 it was slightly stronger than the option where Yi has chosen. Play probably will continue very similar to the way the game progressed. b6, bishop d6, takes, rook d6, and here white goes queen e5. And he does have very decent drawing chances, I feel, although of course black is always slightly better because he is currently 2 pawns up, and yes, white will probably pick up h6 or g3 or maybe even both of them, but by that time black will be able to stabilize and perhaps play against a somewhat weakened d4 pawn. Where Yi instead played queen d2, and we got the same position but with the queen on d2. Castles king b2, b6, bishop d6, takes. And here a normal continuation, I guess, would be rook takes h6, to which black probably replies by rook hd8, queen f4, queen b7, queen g3, queen d7. And after rook h4, it would appear as if black just wins a pawn by c6, c5. But actually after queen f3 here, white appears to just equalize on the spot, because king b8, rook f4, or rook h7 are quite playable for white. And if you play queen b7, white takes, and has, for instance, the move rook f1, after which he should probably make a reasonably comfortable draw. So I think rook takes h6 objectively was pretty close to complete equality, but where Yi is not looking for an easy way out. He played queen f4, rook d7, and in this position, once again, you can take on g3, and you will not be much worse either b5 or queen b7. But that's not why Yi opted for queen f4. He wanted, of course, to play d5 here. And this is perhaps not that great an idea, but the way to refute it is not that easy to find. And in practical terms, this could very easily be a very playable choice, which makes black's life a lot harder, because he needs to calculate a lot of very concrete variations. For instance, the line that during the live show I felt was quite strong, cd5, and rook hd8, is apparently not that good at all, because after rook c1 check, king b7, white has a very strong quiet move here, rook c2, preventing the potential incursions along the second rank. And then white starts collecting the weakened black pawns, and his king on b2 is probably a bit safer than the king on b7 here, because of the way the pieces are positioned, and because the queen on a6 is so much out of play. And I think black has some winning chances here, but white has high hopes of holding a position like this. Anish instead played cd5, ed5, and in this position black objectively is better. But I think from here on out, Yi did not make a single inaccuracy. His game from this position onwards was, you can term it machine-like precision. He didn't miss a single tactical opportunity, and it probably still wasn't enough to objectively equalize had Anish found every single difficult decision that he needed to find. But at some point Anish had started going wrong, and you will see what happened. King g4 is the first move that you need to make, and the only move you can make in this position. If you pin the rook by playing queen f5, black immediately wins after queen e2 and queen e6, and black consolidates. So you start with queen g4 with the idea of stopping queen e2 check altogether, and you create a very unpleasant threat of both rook takes d5 and rook c1 check, which will force black to play king d8, which is not something black wants. And in this position, apparently the strongest move, and a move that is really incredibly difficult to find, is f5, queen takes f5, and only in this position do you play queen b5. Black wants to play king b7 here, and if white plays a4, then you go queen e2 check, king a1, and here it becomes obvious why you don't start with queen e2 and you include queen b5 and force white to play a4. You play queen a7 here, creating a huge threat of queen a3 check, which will win black a very important tempo to consolidate, because otherwise white could take on d5 here and probably would be completely fine. It's important to note also that if you start with queen b5 and only play f5 after a4, white can play queen f3 here, not queen takes f5. And next move, white takes on d5. And once the d5 pawn is gone, in a lot of these positions, it is very, very difficult for the black king to actually escape the checks. And here black is not even better anymore. Anish chose a move which I think most people would choose here, queen b7, which is a lot easier to understand and seemingly a lot easier to calculate. Once again, you want to play king b8. And you give white an opportunity of playing rook c1, for instance, king b8, rook h6, rook h8, because you cannot take because of the back rank mate, queen g3, king a8, but you still remain a pawn up here, and yes, white will have drawing chances, but I'm sure Anish was pretty happy about some kind of an outcome like this, because you have pressure for zero risk pretty much. It's not going to be easy to win this position, but on the other hand, it's not going to be easy for white to draw it either. But Wei Yi had other ideas. He played queen f4. It seems it's connected with a similar idea. You once again stop the king from reaching b8, and the queen is somewhat more actively placed. There was an option here for black to play rook c7, but Anish, I guess, felt that he finally had everything under control, and perhaps maybe he even felt that this was a blunder which finally gets him home and dry. Queen b8, a very strong seemingly move, which drives the queen away from f4, creates a square on b7 for the black king to use, and for a second it appears as if the game is over. Queen f6, king b7, and if rook c1 here, creating the idea of queen c6 mate, you can just play queen d8, and black did finally stabilize and should win quite comfortably from here. But that was not Wei Yi's intention. After king b7, he blitzed out rook takes d5. It's important to know that both players were down to less than 10 minutes here, and they weren't in horrible time trouble, but still all of these decisions were taken on very, very limited time, which makes them even more impressive. In this position, rook takes d5 is strictly the only move that doesn't lose, so you have to do this. And after queen takes f7, I guess from a practical standpoint, it was stronger to play queen c7, queen d5, king b8, and black still remains a pawn up, and the king safety is very similar for both sides, which means that white will always have some counterplay. But it will not be easy for white to make a draw here, and a reasonably strong computer remains convinced that this is closer to a black victory than it is to a draw. I'm not sure if I believe it or not, to be honest, because with such limited material, it feels like converting this will not be easy, but this would have been still an uphill task for Wei Yi. But Anish felt that he should be winning after king c6. And this is probably the last chapter of the game. The game continued check, rook c5. All of these moves are pretty much forced. Queen f3 check, king b5, queen d3 check, king a5. And Anish probably felt, yeah, that was a spoiler, sorry. Anish probably felt that this game is over because queen d2 check, king a6, queen d3 check is not a draw. Black plays rook b5, a4, queen e5 check, and there really isn't a good square for this king to go. You have to play king a2 or king a3, and then black can play something like rook f8 and simply take on b5 with the queen, with very decent chances of converting his extra pawn into a full point. But instead of this, Wei Yi blitzed out queen d4. And this is probably the point where Anish realized just how difficult his task will be. And we don't really know if he even saw queen e8, which is really the only way for black to continue here. First, you should note that queen e5, a move which looks like it's winning on the spot, actually is losing, because it's very easy to forget that the queen is unpinned after rook c5, queen c5. After queen e8, the game would continue b4 check, king a6, b takes c5, queen b5 check. And here, after king a3, you probably play rook c8, white has rook c4, and even if Anish spotted queen e8, which I think he probably did, it's very easy to stop here and assume that you don't have anything at all, because if you take on c5, white goes rook a4, queen g7, and this is just completely equal, because rook c7, rook a7 is a draw. As a matter of fact, in this position, and it would have been move 41, so Anish would have had time to consider his options. Black can still play queen c6, and he still is better. Not winning, I think claiming that black is winning is strong. But black definitely is the side pushing here. So that was mathematically the last chance that Anish missed in this game. But being quite short on time at this point, he played king a6, and this is now just an immediate draw, because white goes queen a4 check. If you play king b7, after queen e4 check, you no longer will even have any options to avoid the perpetual. Anish instead played rook a5, queen c4, king b7 once again is a draw because simply of queen e4 or queen c6, rook b5, queen a4 check, and you cannot even return the rook anymore, because if you go king b7 here, white just gives this check once again and it's a perpetual. So the game ended rook a5, queen c4 check, and draw was agreed. As I mentioned, the round featured a number of decisive games. Wesley Saw won a somewhat topsy-turvy game against Pintala Harikrishna, where he was almost winning, according to official theory, which was the most surprising thing, against Hari, who misplayed what is considered to be a pretty safe opening and was in very, very bad shape, but then managed to almost successfully defend a horrible position and only made a fatal misstep towards the first time control in very serious time trouble, and still ended up losing. Pavel Ilyanov, who used to lead the tournament after 4 rounds, lost with white to Levon Aronian. Sergei Karyakin played a very, very uncharacteristic for himself, really poor game against Adiban Bhaskaran and lost with white. And Luke Van Vele continues having a really unpleasant event so far, losing a long but cheerless game against Radek Wojtaszek. But I still feel that this fight between Wei Yi and Anish Giri was probably the most interesting and the most exciting game of the round. So I've chosen to show you that game instead of all those decisive results. With Pavel Ilyanov losing, Wesley So is now the sole leader of the tournament with 4 out of 5. Magnus Carlsen and Pavel Ilyanov 3.5 out of 5. And there are still 8 rounds to go in this tournament, and the action is quite clearly heating up. So I hope you continue watching. We will be back tomorrow with the live coverage of round 6. But for now, this has been Peter Svidler with the highlights video of round 5. Thanks everybody.